the sharp crack of gunfire, the choking scent of smoke, the gut-wrenching cries of my brothers in arms, these are the ghosts that refuse to leave me. They cling to my days, invade my nights, and remind me of everything I can't forget. My name is Dylan Cooper. I'm 29 years old, and I've witnessed things most people couldn't even begin to comprehend. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles. We were the first to land and the last to leave. The tip of the spear that cut through the worst of it. I've jumped out of perfectly functioning aircraft into hell on earth, places so unforgiving even the devil might hesitate to step foot there. I've watched close friends be torn apart by IEDs, seen entire villages go up in flames, and taken lives. Lives of men who were simply fighting for their homes. But it's not the chaos that lingers the most. It's the stillness. The eerie quiet before the storm of combat, the unsettling peace after the dust has settled, the heavy silence in the barracks when an empty cot tells you someone won't be coming back. That's silence. That's what grips me in the dead of night, what keeps me staring at the ceiling long after I should be sleeping. When I finally made it home to Kentucky, I thought the war was behind me. I thought I could move forward, find something close to normal again. But civilian life? It's a battlefield of its own. No one warns you about how hard it is to exist without the constant awareness of snipers or hidden explosives. No one teaches you how to talk to people who have never felt the ground shake beneath them from an explosion. I tried to adjust, took a job at a local hardware store, sat through therapy sessions at the VA, but the world around me had turned into a minefield. A car backfiring could send me diving for cover. A sudden, loud noise could make my heart pound like I was still in a combat zone. They labeled it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, as if giving it a name somehow made it easier to handle. It didn't. The only thing that dulled the memories, even just a little, was alcohol. It became my shield, my way of escaping, my way of chasing sleep without the nightmares tearing me apart. Whiskey numbed the edges, made the nights a little less unbearable. But it also pushed away the people who cared. Sarah, my girlfriend, stayed longer than most would have, but even she had limits. The night I lost control, threw my fist into the wall, convinced for one terrifying moment that I was back in Kandahar under attack. That was it for her. The next morning, she was gone. No argument, no goodbyes. Just a note on the kitchen table and the fading scent of her perfume hanging in the air. That's how I ended up sitting alone on a warm June night, scrolling through job postings with a half-empty bottle of Jack resting against my leg. I was barely holding on, one missed rent payment away from losing the roof over my head. The hardware store had let me go after too many close calls, too many times my past had bled into the present. The last incident had sealed my fate. A customer had dropped a box of nails, and before I even realized what I was doing, I had a hammer raised, ready to swing. The sound had thrown me straight back into a firefight, my body reacting before my mind caught up. They couldn't keep me around after that. My eyes blurred as I scrolled through listings, the whiskey making it harder to focus. I was ready to give up for the night when something unusual caught my attention. Nighttime park ranger needed immediately. No experience required. It was at Mammoth Cave National Park, just a couple of hours from where I was staying. The pay wasn't great, but it was better than nothing. And working nights meant fewer people, fewer chances for things to go wrong. Maybe, just maybe, it could be what I needed. Without thinking too hard about it, I applied. My fingers were clumsy from the alcohol, but somehow I managed to fill everything out and hit submit. I didn't expect much. The next morning, my phone rang. A man named Chuck was on the other end. His voice was blunt, straight to the point. Said they needed someone immediately, and if I could be there by sunset, the job was mine. No long interview, no background check, no hesitation. Just show up, and we'll get you sorted out. So that evening, I found myself behind the wheel, heading toward Mammoth Cave National Park. The drive stirred something in me. Memories of school trips, childhood adventures. I remembered the wonder I had felt as a kid, stepping into those vast underground chambers for the first time. The thrill of gliding along the underground river, the excitement of exploring the darkness. Back then, the caves had been mysterious, magical, but now, that darkness felt different, heavier. Less like an adventure, more like something waiting with open arms. The sun was dipping below the horizon as I neared the park, the sky ablaze with streaks of orange and violet. Towering trees lined the road, their leaves whispering in the evening breeze. The sounds of the forest surrounded me, birds calling out as they settled in for the night, crickets beginning their rhythmic song. For a brief moment, something inside me loosened, just a little. Then, as the last light faded, so did that fleeting sense of peace. It was replaced by something else. A quiet, creeping unease I couldn't quite shake. I pulled into the parking lot near the visitor center, watching as the last few families trickled out. Kids chattered excitedly, their voices full of energy, talking about the caves they had explored. The air carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, laced with the faint, damp earthiness that always clung to cave entrances. As I watched the last of the tourists drive away, a strange sense of detachment settled over me, like I was watching my last link to the normal world vanish into the distance. Chuck was waiting for me at the ranger station, a rugged-looking man in his 50s, his scruffy beard and well-worn Park Service hat giving him the appearance of someone who had spent more years outdoors than in. He didn't bother with introductions or small talk. Instead, he simply handed me a uniform and a flashlight. "Your shift starts at 10 p.m., ends at 6 a.m., he said, his voice rough but not unkind. Main job's to patrol the campgrounds, make sure nobody's breaking park rules, and keep an eye out for fires. Radios on your belt if you need anything. Got any questions?" I shook my head, a little surprised at the lack of formalities. No background check, no training, just a uniform, a flashlight, and a start time. But I wasn't about to complain. Chuck gave a short nod, apparently satisfied. "All right then, get changed. Go over the park map," he instructed. Then, just as he was about to leave, he hesitated, his gaze meeting mine. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw something in his expression, concern, maybe even fear, but just as quickly, it was gone. "And Dylan," he added, his voice lower now, "be careful out there. The park, it's different at night." Before I could ask him what he meant, he was already gone, leaving me standing alone in the small ranger station. I changed into the uniform, surprised at how well it fit, then turned my attention to the large map on the wall. Mammoth Cave was enormous, miles of winding trails, both above and below ground. My patrol route would mostly cover the campgrounds and the areas surrounding the main cave entrances. As I waited for my shift to begin, I found my mind replaying Chuck's parting words. Different at night. What was that supposed to mean? I'd been to some of the most dangerous places on Earth. What could possibly be so unsettling about a national park in Kentucky? At exactly 10 p.m., I stepped outside and into the night. The difference was immediate. The daytime liveliness, the sounds of visitors and chirping birds had vanished, replaced by a silence that felt almost unnatural. The towering trees cast jagged silhouettes against the night sky, their branches stretching outward like skeletal fingers. My flashlight cut through the darkness, but the shadows it created seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I began my patrol, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots sounding unnervingly loud in the stillness. The first hour passed without incident. I walked along the main roads, checked in on the few campers still awake, and nodded at the occasional raccoon or possum scurrying across the path. But with every step, a nagging sense of wrongness crept in. It was subtle at first, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something unseen to stir. Around 11:30 p.m., something strange happened. I was following one of the less traveled trails when my flashlight beam caught a glint of metal reflecting from the underbrush. It was just off the path, partially hidden among the leaves. Curious, I stepped off the trail to investigate. The moment my foot left the marked path, a wave of unease washed over me. The forest felt different, closer, heavier. The darkness around me seemed to deepen, as if it had substance. I forced myself to ignore the sensation, pushing forward to get a better look at whatever had caught my attention. That's when I heard it. A voice. Soft yet distinct. Close. Always stay on the marked trails. If you find yourself off the trail, do not move. Call for assistance immediately. I spun around, heart pounding, my flashlight beam sweeping across the trees. But there was no one there. Nothing but the empty trail and the vast, dark expanse of the forest beyond. The voice had been so clear, so close, it wasn't my imagination. It couldn't be. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "Is someone there?" Silence. Only the rustling of leaves in the faint breeze and the distant, haunting call of a whippoorwill. I stood frozen for what felt like minutes, listening, searching for any hint that I wasn't alone. But there was nothing. A cold knot of dread twisted in my stomach. I turned back toward the trail, walking quickly now, and the moment my boots touched the marked path again, the strange, suffocating feeling lifted. I stood there, catching my breath, my pulse still racing. What the hell just happened? A prank? Some local kids messing around? Or was I starting to lose it already? I forced myself to dismiss it as nothing more than my imagination playing tricks on me and pushed forward with my patrol, but an uneasy sensation clung to me like a second skin. The night felt different now, the forest almost aware of my presence, as if it was observing me, waiting, anticipating the moment I might slip up. The following hours dragged by in a tense fog of hyper-awareness, each passing minute stretching thin with an overwhelming sense of paranoia. Every sound became amplified, each rustling leaf or snapping twig sending a jolt through my nerves. Shadows twisted and stretched in unnatural ways, tricking my eyes into seeing movement where there was none. Every so often, I'd glance over my shoulder, convinced I'd catch something lurking just at the edge of my vision. But there was nothing. Only the abyss of darkness surrounding me. The gaping mouths of cave entrances, like silent watchers in the night. It was just after 2 a.m. when the night shifted from merely unsettling to something else entirely, something I couldn't explain. I was making my rounds near one of the primary cave entrances when a voice rang out through the silence. "Dylan? Dylan, help me." I came to an abrupt stop, my breath hitching. That voice? I knew that voice. The familiarity of it sent ice water coursing through my veins. Images from a lifetime ago flooded my mind. The scorching heat of Kandahar, a dusty street littered with debris, the deafening sound of gunfire. Martinez. My stomach dropped. That was impossible. It couldn't be him. He was gone. I'd seen it with my own eyes, watched helplessly as an IED tore through him, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. But the voice called out again, desperate. "Dylan, please, I'm trapped, help me." My muscles tensed, my instincts screaming at me to react. Every fiber of my being, every ounce of training I had ever received urged me to respond, to run toward the voice, to help. But something deeper inside me, something primal, held me back. My jaw clenched, and with every ounce of willpower I had, I turned away. The voice didn't stop. It chased after me, lingering in the air, echoing inside my skull. Every step I took felt like a betrayal, but I knew that whatever was calling to me from the darkness, it wasn't Martinez. It couldn't be. Then I caught it, a scent in the air, thick and pungent, sulfur. The acrid stench clawed at my throat, yanking me back to another memory. The aftermath of an explosion, the choking haze of burning wreckage, the desperate search through rubble for survivors who weren't there. My chest tightened, and I forced myself to focus. This wasn't a flashback. This was real. And something was very, very wrong. I picked up my pace, my pulse hammering as the suffocating smell grew stronger. My hands were slick with sweat, my grip tightening around the flashlight as if it could somehow protect me from whatever unseen thing lurked nearby. Then, just as I was convincing myself I'd escaped whatever horror was unfolding in these woods, I heard it. The sound of movement. Not the gentle rustling of wind through leaves. Not the scurry of a nocturnal animal. No, this was different. Low guttural noises, like something breathing, something shifting just beyond my sight. My body locked up, my heart pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, a single moment of indecision, and that was my mistake. My hand moved before my brain could stop it, directing my flashlight toward the source of the sound. And that's when I saw it. The image burned itself into my mind in an instant, searing itself into my memory in a way I knew I would never ever forget. A towering form, grotesquely tall, its limbs too many, too long, twisting and contorting in ways that defied all logic. Its face, God, its face was all wrong, like a poor attempt at creating a human, but failing in ways that made my stomach lurch. Its skin was a pallid, stretched gray, too tight over its frame, making it look as if it had been sewn together from something that was never meant to exist. But its eyes? Those were the worst, because they weren't the eyes of a monster. They were human, intelligent, malevolent, and they were staring straight at me. For a moment, neither of us moved. A terrible stillness settled over the clearing, and then slowly its mouths, plural, curled into something resembling a grin. It was the kind of expression that told me it knew me. It knew exactly who I was, what I feared, and how this was going to end. Then it moved. I didn't think. I ran. I ran harder and faster than I ever had in my entire life, faster than I had ever run under gunfire, faster than I had ever run when my life was on the line before. Everything else vanished. Protocol, rational thought, everything. The only thing that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between me and that thing. The sound of it pursuing me was deafening. The ground trembled beneath its weight, the snap of branches and the creak of trees shattering the stillness of the night as it tore through the forest in pursuit. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I hurtled over fallen logs, tore through the underbrush, barely registering the stinging of branches as they whipped across my arms and face. My body was running on pure survival instinct, every thought drowned out by the singular, desperate need to escape. Time became meaningless. Only the relentless chase, the thunder of footsteps behind me, and the agonizing certainty that no matter how fast I ran, it was faster. Then, just as my strength was beginning to wane, I saw it. Lights flickering through the trees, the campground, people, safety. I pushed myself harder, lungs on fire, legs shaking, forcing myself into the clearing. And then, nothing. No screams. No alarmed campers rushing out of their tents. No sign that anyone else had heard the chaos that had just unfolded in the woods behind me. The camp was still, undisturbed, its inhabitants blissfully unaware that something unspeakable, had been hunting me in the dark. I stood there, gasping for breath, body trembling, waiting for the creature to come crashing through the trees after me. But it never did. The woods were quiet, aside from the usual sounds of the night. Had I imagined it all? Was my PTSD finally pushing me over the edge? As my breathing steadied and my heartbeat slowed to something resembling normal, I noticed something near the edge of the campground, a large stone. There were markings carved into its surface. I hesitated before approaching, sweeping my flashlight across the rough texture. When I saw what was written, an icy dread crept through me. Rule 1, always stay on the marked trails. If you find yourself off the path, do not move. Call for help immediately. Rule 2, if you hear your name being called, do not answer. It isn't who you think it is. Rule 3, never shine your flashlight directly into cave openings. You might not like what's staring back. Rule 4, if you encounter wildlife, do not run. Back away slowly, maintaining eye contact. Rule 5, under no circumstances should you enter the caves after sunset. Rule 6, if you detect the scent of sulfur, leave the area at once. Do not try to find the source. Rule 7, if you hear movement in the bushes around you, stay completely still. Wait until the sounds pass. Rule 8, do not touch or take anything you find in the park. No matter how valuable it appears, leave it where it is. Rule 9, if you see lights in the distance where no lights should be, do not approach them. Instead, report their location immediately. Rule 10, at exactly 3:33 a.m., return to the park office and stay there until sunrise. No matter what noises you hear outside, do not open the door. I stared at the list, my thoughts racing. These weren't ordinary park rules. They weren't safety guidelines. They were warnings. And they explained everything that had happened tonight. The voice I heard on the trail, Martinez's calls, the sulfur smell, the thing in the bushes. I turned to leave, my flashlight beam grazing the stone one last time, and that's when I saw it. There were 2 Rule 7s. The second was partly covered by moss, but I could just make out what it said. Rule 7. If you hear noises from the bushes around you, turn off your light and count to 7. If the noises stop, you may proceed. If they continue, repeat the process. My stomach twisted. I had already broken that rule. I had shined my flashlight directly at whatever was hiding in the bushes, and now it was out there, somewhere in the park, hunting. I didn't know if it was after me or someone else, and I didn't want to find out. I checked my watch, 2:45 a.m., less than an hour until I had to be back at the office. I decided to do one last check of the campground just to make sure everyone was safe. As I walked between the tents, I heard a small, trembling voice. "Mommy, I'm scared. There's a monster outside." I froze. A woman's voice responded softly, reassuringly. "There's no monster, sweetheart. It's just the wind." If only she knew. I wanted to wake them up, to warn them. But what would I say? That there was something lurking in the darkness, something that shouldn't exist? That the park itself was alive and watching? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was. Finishing my rounds, I made my way back toward the ranger station. But something felt different now. The forest no longer felt like just trees and dirt. It felt like it was breathing, watching. The shadows stretched unnaturally, and every rustling leaf sounded like whispers. The trail stretched on longer than it should have, each step dragging me further into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. By the time I reached the station, it was 3:30 a.m. I practically ran inside, slamming the door behind me. Safe. I was safe. At least that's what I told myself as I collapsed into a chair, my entire body trembling from exhaustion and fear. The silence inside was almost worse than the forest. The slow, rhythmic ticking of the clock seemed unbearably loud. Each second dragged on, stretching the night into something endless. My eyes kept drifting toward the window, scanning the tree line for movement, for some sign that the thing from the bushes had followed me. 3:33 a.m. I checked my watch. The time had come and gone. The rule was clear: stay inside until sunrise. No matter what. A small, bitter laugh escaped me. I was a trained soldier. I had survived war. And yet here I was, hiding in an office, terrified of rules carved into an old rock. But then I remembered. The voice on the trail. Martinez's voice, even though he was gone. The sulfur, the whispers, and that thing in the forest. I couldn't get the image out of my head. Its twisted form, that unnatural grin, those disturbingly human eyes. I closed my own, but sleep wouldn't come. The night stretched on, and I knew one thing for certain. The real nightmare was only beginning. Around 5 in the morning, I heard it. A faint noise outside, just a whisper of sound against the stillness. It took me a second to recognize it. Scratching. Something with claws, dragging across wood. At first, it was soft, barely there, but then it grew louder, more urgent, like whatever was making it was testing the boundaries of the station, looking for a way inside. My breath caught in my throat, my fingers twitching toward a weapon that wasn't there. I sat frozen as the sound crept along the walls, moving methodically from one side of the building to the next, circling. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was thick, unnatural, pressing down on me like a weight. I strained my ears, listening for anything, breathing, footsteps, the rustle of something shifting in the darkness. But there was nothing. The minutes dragged by, stretching impossibly long, each one heavier than the last. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe too loudly, afraid that the smallest sound might bring whatever it was back. My flashlight felt like a lifeline in my grip, even though I hadn't dared turn it on. It wasn't until the first rays of sunlight bled through the windows that I felt like I could finally breathe again. I had never been so relieved to see daylight. When Chuck arrived at 6 to take over, I was still in the same spot, gripping my flashlight with white-knuckled fingers. I must have looked like hell, pale, drenched in cold sweat, my eyes wild from fear and exhaustion. He took one look at me and grunted, his voice rough but not unkind. "Rough night?" he asked. I wanted to say something, to explain what had happened, but my voice wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded. Chuck sighed, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Night shift ain't for everyone," he muttered. "No shame in that." I almost told him then, about the rules, the voices, the thing that had been outside. But as soon as I opened my mouth, I realized how insane it all sounded. Who would believe me? Instead, I swallowed it down and focused on peeling off my uniform with trembling hands. I just wanted to leave, to put as much distance between myself and that place as possible. As I reached the door, Chuck's voice stopped me. "Listen, son," he said, his tone lower now, almost cautious. "I don't know what you saw last night, and I ain't gonna ask, but if you're smart, you'll forget all about it and never come back here." He paused, letting that sink in before adding, "Some things are better left alone." A chill ran through me. He knew. Maybe not the full truth, but enough to understand that something was wrong out there. How many others had been in my place before me? How many had seen what I saw? The drive home was a blur. My hands clenched the wheel, my eyes flicking constantly to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something lurking behind me. Every rustle of leaves, every shift of shadows on the roadside made my pulse spike. Even when I finally pulled into my driveway, even when the sun was high in the sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that I wasn't safe. The next few days were worse. I jumped at every little noise, flinched at shadows that stretched too long in the evening light. My nerves were shot, my thoughts a mess. I kept telling myself it was just stress, that I was overreacting, that there was no creature, no supernatural nightmare waiting in the dark, just a guy with a bad case of paranoia and PTSD. But deep down, I knew better. I tried to go back to normal, found another dead-end job, started drinking again, anything to push that night out of my head. But the memories stuck, clinging to me like something rotten, something I couldn't scrub away. My dreams were filled with shadows and clawed hands, with the sound of that awful scratching. And every time I woke up, gasping for breath, I knew it wasn't over. 6 months later, on a hot Tuesday evening, I stepped outside to take out the trash. The heat was suffocating, mosquitoes buzzing angrily around me as I grumbled under my breath. Just a normal, forgettable moment until I heard it. A bird call. But not just any bird call. The same eerie, warped sound I'd heard that night at the ranger station. The trash bag slipped from my hands. My body locked up, every muscle going rigid. Slowly, I turned toward the tree line at the edge of my yard. And that's when I saw it. Movement. Something tall. Something with too many limbs. Panic surged through me, slamming into my chest like a hammer. I bolted inside, slamming the door and locking it tight. My hands trembled as I checked every lock, every window, pulling the curtains closed. But no matter what I did, I could still feel it. Out there. Watching. Waiting. And now, as I sit here writing this, it's happening again. Something is moving outside my window. I can hear it breathing, slow and heavy, the scrape of claws against wood, the same sound from that night. I don't know if I'll survive until morning. But if you're reading this, remember, always follow the rules. Every single one. Your life may depend on it. And if you ever find yourself in Kentucky, staring at a job posting for a night ranger position at Mammoth Cave, keep driving.